Welcome to the Learning for Legacy show with me, your host, Afam Onyenakala. This is all about the concept of making generational wealth understandable, practical, and accessible. I'll be exploring a range of topics and sharing conversations, interviews, and more. Because what good is building wealth if we don't build the people? Welcome everyone to another edition of Learning for Legacy. I've got a question for you. What streaming service do you use? Is it Netflix? Is it Disney Plus? Apple? Some of you may not have one. Some of you have probably got a combination of all three. But in all seriousness, what is your streaming service? And by that, in this context, I mean, what stream of income do you have or would you like to have? Now, on this particular episode, what I'm going to focus on is something that's, I believe, close to everyone's heart that we don't often talk about enough. And it's what I believe is that everyone should have 4 income streams and why that's important. Now, we've seen how from early 2020 all the way into this brand new year of 2022, the last 2 years have shown a profound change and difference to the way we do work, we conduct our lives, how digital transactions have changed, and how the economy operates from how this global coronavirus pandemic has changed a lot of things in our lives. Many things that we do now will never go back to how things were 2 years ago. So it raises a lot of interesting questions because there's great opportunity that has come with that. But at the same time, there's been a great deal of uncertainty, discomfort, and fear for people because so many things have changed. How does this affect work going forward? How does it affect the ability to generate income if the industry that you're in all of a sudden becomes obsolete, either through disruptive technologies or through cutbacks or through anything that comes our way as a result of this coronavirus pandemic. So I'm going to touch on income streams and why it's very important that everyone should have at least 4 income streams. And the reason why I say everyone is at times it has seemed as if this is only something reserved for a select few and that there's a large portion of the population, the global population, that hasn't had access to this and may not feel that they will ever have the opportunity to have access to this. So I'd like to address this because this is something going forward that should be essentially a basic right for everyone. So when we look at this, why are 4 income streams important? Why should we have 4? Why not 2? Why not 3? What's specific about having 4? When we look at this, the reason we're going to just home in on the digit 4 is that in many respects, we all have 4 very unique financial needs and requirements. The first one is just our everyday basic cost of living. We need money to satisfy the very basic things in our lives, such as keeping a roof over our head, having food to eat, making sure our bills are paid on time. And when we look at what's happening across global economies now, we can see the effects of energy price rises and the like. So these are very, very essential questions that we have to address. And this cost of living also extends to things like clothing and the importance of this area. The second important financial need that we have after standard cost of living is that of security. Everybody has the right to have a sense of security financially. And it's a very, very deep, basic financial need for everyone. Now, let's look at it a number of ways. When you consider the elite or the super rich, everything is taken care of. And if you have someone who's middle class, on one perspective, it could seem as if they have everything. They have the car, the house, the holidays. And then you have those who are considered poor, who are scraping by with just whatever they have from day to day to live. And when I think back to the 2008 financial crisis, when the credit crunch hit, it didn't necessarily hit the super rich. It didn't necessarily hit the poor. In fact, it touched everyone. But the sector that it hit the hardest in many respects was the middle class, because so much of what they did was connected to credit. So when the crunch came and jobs were lost, it affected everything, because people could no longer have an income to pay for their mortgages. Cars that were on finance were no longer able to be paid for. And all of a sudden, those that were in that bracket of being middle class, all of a sudden became poor. So the credit crunch, it actually created a divide between the three groups, and it just left essentially those that were rich and then those that were poor in certain countries. So this second point of security is very, very important, because we don't know what will happen next year within the economy and the year after that. So it's essential that we have a security blanket in place. Now, there's various schools of thought on how much money should be reserved, from whether that's 6 months of savings up into a year. But that is essentially something that everyone should have the ability to put together, to have as a safety net, so that whenever another crisis comes, there's at least a financial fortress to draw from. So those needs, as I touched on earlier, the first one is just the basic standard cost of living expenses. The second one is looking at issues to do with security. The third point, the third need that we all have is that for investments. Because when we look at the purpose of money, the true purpose of money is to reproduce itself if used effectively. So investments, when used wisely, can generate additional income for us to put into different areas, such as our retirement, such as children's education, such as projects and enterprises that we wish to set up and initiate for greater purposes. The fourth important financial need that we have is that for fun. And I talk about this within the template of learning for legacy in different areas. So, as you know, we look at learning, we look at laughter, we look at leadership, and we look at legacy. So fun is essential because that touches on this area of laughter. So why would we consider fun to be a unique and distinct financial need? Is because in this area of fun, this is where we would need money for holidays, whether locally or internationally. Many of us have leisure interests that we would like to sustain and fulfill. And many of us have different hobbies to sustain, whether these are personal, professional, or just as a passing interest. So it's really important that we, first of all, before considering acquiring different income streams, to really have a foundation for why we need to have them in the first place. Again, for that basic standard of living, to have these basic areas in our lives covered, food, clothing, as I mentioned earlier, Secondly, to touch on the issue of personal security by having a financial reserve in place for any emergencies that come our way. Thirdly, to consider those of the things connected with investments. So having vehicles in place that enable our money to reproduce itself, to put in place things such as successful retirement or education for children and the like. And the fourth point, again, is that of fun, where we can address and put money towards recreational activities that benefit us and our families, from leisure to various hobbies and holidays. Now, when we look at how things have traditionally been done in the past, in the old way of doing things, the singular income that we would have coming into our household would then be split into these 4 different areas. And we would historically find ourselves in situations where we are struggling to make ends meet, because from that singular income, we're trying to address our standard of living. We're trying to address the area of security. We're trying to address the area of investments. And we're also trying to address the area of fun. So in the old way of doing things, that singular income would barely take care of the basics, let alone addressing the other 3 areas. And then as a result of that, what would happen, and what still happens today, is that people then find themselves in a situation where they are sacrificing or taking a hit to their future for the sake of now. So they are minimizing the ability of their future because of the needs for today. Now, the new way of doing things, the alternative way of doing things, and the essential way of doing things as a result of where we are now in this current economy, and where and how industries and the way of work and the way of social commerce and conduct in our lives is changing. The new way of doing things is where instead what we do is we bring 4 incomes into one visionary outlook for our lives. So what we ultimately want to do is have 4 separate incomes coming in that can address all of these areas. Because in this economy that we live in now, creating income streams in different areas has become a lot easier than it has been in the past. And ideally, what we can do now is that we can assign each income to these different cost areas that I touched on before, these distinct 4 cost areas: standard of living, security, investments, and fun and recreation. So we can do it in a number of simple ways, whereby with one income, we can address those basic areas, the bills, the cost of food, the cost of keeping a roof over our heads. Another income, or the second income, we could then use that to focus on our security plan. So focus on initially maybe having 1 month of savings in place, growing that to 2, 3, 6 months, and ultimately to 12 months. The third income, we can dedicate that solely towards our investments and our future. This is a long-term future fund, essentially. And finally, the fourth income stream, we could then target this to focus on our leisure, our recreation, and our fun. So it's very important for us to obviously live in the present and focus on our day-to-day and everything that we have to do. But we also need to have a handle on the future. So if we look at two sections, the present and the future, two of the income streams can be set to focus on our standard of living, our basic cost of living, and secondly, on the area of leisure, recreation, and fun. And in terms of our future focus, the other income stream can be set towards focusing on our security, and the final income stream can be focused on our long-term future and in our investments. And next week, on next week's episode, I will then be focusing on what your money-making opportunities can be and possibly should be. So until next time, thanks for listening and stay great. Thanks for listening to Learning for Legacy. To join our community or find out about what else we get up to, you can follow us on Twitter at Legacy Learning or on our website at www.legacylearning.co.uk. To access additional content or exclusives from this particular episode, please find the information within the show notes.